Hi, this is Denise Matthew, and welcome to another part of HT 101, How to Read Your Human Design Chart. I just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to slow down the speed of my voice, it's an easy thing to do. Just do it on the playback speed as I'm showing here, and it will be an experience tailor-made for you. If you've been following all along, you'll see that I wasn't lying when I said there is a tremendous amount of information. I've already talked so much and we haven't even hit the centers yet. What that says is that human design can give us so much information about who we are and how we operate. And that's why it's so important for more and more people to know. So let's get into the centers. So you've probably already heard me talk about things being undefined, or some things being open, or some things being closed, or some things being defined. That's basically the terminology that human design use for centers when it comes to if they're open or they don't have color, or if they're closed or defined and they do have color. When a center is undefined or open, it will always be white. And when a center is defined or closed, it will always be a specific color. And the colors are always going to be the same based on that particular center. It doesn't change based on birthday or anything like that. If it's open, it will be white. And if it's defined, it will be a specific color. And this is just an image of all the colors that show you when something is defined. Those are always going to be the same. So that's why it's a great way to be able to see if someone has a red square, and we know that they're going to be a generator type. If somebody has a brown triangle on the right, then we know that they have emotional authority. So the colors can really help with determining certain parts of a chart, even before you read it. And if we just look at the chart, we can see that without definition, it's easier to see because you can see all the numbers. Well, the numbers are showing you what would be considered the gates. So we talk about gates. The numbers on the chart, on the body graph, as well as on the side part, which I'll show you in just a minute, they are actually all the gates. Two gates together make one channel. Now, the channels are always going to be made by two specific gates. So if you see there's a 12 and there's a 22, that would make the 12-22 channel. The 57 and the 20 would make the 57-20. The 48 and the 16 would make the 48-16 channel. So they're specific gates that connect to make full channels. And sometimes people will say, what's your definition? Or they'll say, where's the definition in the chart? Well, the definition in the chart consists of all the centers that are defined or all the centers that are colored. When we don't have definition, or where we don't have definition, are the places in the chart where there's only white. So in this case, we would see that a person doesn't have definition in the head and ajna. They don't have definition in the spleen, the root, or the will, but they do have definition in the throat, identity, sacral, and solar plexus. So it just basically shows you. How do you get definition? Well, you get definition by having two gates that connect together that will make sort of like a road between two centers. So if you see here, we have the throat and the solar plexus are connected because there is a full line between the two of them. And the identity and the sacral are connected. So they're both, so when these connections come into play, or you have both gates for a channel, then it's like both of those centers light up and they become defined centers. When you only have half a channel or one gate of a channel, then that would be considered what's called a hanging gate. Hanging gates are parts of the chart, or they're always looking for their match. I mean, ultimately, we talk about electromagnetics, or we're always looking for the match to our gates or something that will complete our channel. Because if you can imagine, it's only half a road. And in order for you to get the energy to flow very well, you want to have a full road. So that's where we get into this whole idea of electromagnetics, connecting through the planets, connecting through other relationships. So somebody else who has that opposite gate that will make a full channel with you will help that energy to get to those two centers that would be connected. So when we have something that's black, we're talking about something that comes from the personality side or the conscious parts of us, And something that's red is coming from the unconscious part or the design side. And something that is red and black, some of them have a stripe, means that it's featured more than one time in our chart, and it's featured in the unconscious or design part as well as the conscious personality part. So in this particular chart, you can see that on the right hand side there's all the gates that are featured in this body graph. So when I talked about a gate that's featured more than once in the body graph, then you'll see that here the gate 36 is featured on the design side as well as the personality side. So it's in black and it's also in red. When that happens, if you see a gate featured more than once in your chart, generally it's more of a theme in your life. So you might see more of that energy in your life. So then you'll see the gate 36 is defined, and you'll see that it's got stripes, and that's why it has stripes, because of it's featured more than once. But that's not always going to show up, and that's why it's nice to look at the numbers as well as the actual body graph, because if the gate 36 was featured in another planet, or another planet was in the gate 36, then and it was all in black, it would only be black. So you wouldn't know that it was featured more than once unless you actually have a look at it. And the other gates, so for instance, the gate 12 is in the design side, that's the unconscious one, and the gate 24 is in the personality side, and you can see that's in black. So now we just pull out the centers because we're going to talk about the centers. We can see that some centers have different names. So for instance, if we look at the solar plexus, that's also called the emotional center. If we look at the identity center, it's also called the G center. If we look at the will center, it's also called the ego and the heart. The others are pretty much the same, but it's important to know if somebody's talking about the ego or if they're talking about the heart center, they literally are talking about the will center, and they're all the same. So the terminology might be a little bit different, but they mean all the same. So it's good to know all the names so that if you're talking about it or somebody mentions it, you'll know exactly what they're talking about. So if we talk generally about each center and what it means to have a defined center and what it means to have an open center, we will talk about the defined centers first. When somebody has a defined center, that means that they have a fixed way of expressing the energy of that particular center, because it's almost like you have a file cabinet filled with files. All the files have been collected usually in the first 7 years of your life because there's a lot of impression, but I can't say that's for certain. But generally, that's when we learn a lot of what we believe. So that's kind of what's happened with any of these centers. It's a way of interacting or acting that is fairly consistent with the energy of that particular center. So if I have a defined ajna, that means I have more fixed beliefs. I have an ability to hold on to a belief system. So for instance, if I was brought up in a particular religious belief and that's what I learned, for me, if I leave my family and I'm not in the aura of anybody else or there's no energy from anybody else, I could probably still be okay with that religious belief and continue on with it as long as it felt right to me. I mean, that there's going to be a lot of other reasons that you may not stick with a belief, or you may. But all things being equal, then I would be able to continue on with that belief because that was something that I was used to. It was a fixed belief, and it was something that had been imprinted in me in a very young age. And so I had files for that particular belief, and those files are this is what this is. And so there could be some like a more immovable feeling of certain things. My understanding of the world may be more fixed in how it exists, as opposed to somebody who has something that's open, a center that's open, and each center is going to be related to a particular theme because every center has a particular theme. And potentially when this is the case, when you have fixed beliefs, adopting a new belief may be something that takes a little bit more work and effort to get to really bring that into your being, because you have these fixed beliefs. You have this file cabinet full of files, and then you have to try and squeeze a new one in there. And it depends upon how many files you have. Sometimes people have more space to add more files, and some people don't have a lot of space because they've done a lot of things or tried a lot of things or something like that. So this is the kind of energy that we're talking about with fixed, defined, or closed center. And each center, of course, will have a different theme in what way they are fixed. So we'll talk about that as we go through. But the key is to know that when you have a fixed energy or a fixed defined or closed center, then the energy is something that is more a go-to way of interacting, as opposed to something that can change as somebody with a open center would be. And we'll talk about that right now. And one last thing before we move on, I just wanted to say that when we're talking about defined centers or fixed centers or the fixed energies, we can imagine that anybody who has a defined center are transmitting their energy. So they're transmitting because it's almost like it's turned on, and we're the ones that are defined are transmitting the energy, and the people that have open centers or the centers that are open are absorbing the energy. So you have a transmitter who is defined and an absorber who's undefined. And let's talk about what that means now. So when we talk about open centers, we're talking about an energy that is fluid. And what that means is that the energy comes and goes based on who's around. If we know that anybody with a defined or closed center is a transmitter, or their frequency of the energy of those particular centers is shooting out and it's going everywhere, and people with open centers are absorbing this energy. Not only do they absorb these frequencies, the energy, but they make it bigger. They amplify it. So this is why when you have an open center, you can have more energy for the particular center, even if you're not defined, because it's all about amplification. It's all about making it bigger. So when we talked about an emotional wave earlier on, and I said when somebody has an open emotional center, then they might have what looks like a lot bigger emotions than other people. And that's because not only are they taking in these emotions, but they're actually making them bigger. They're amplifying it. All the open centers are more able to understand things from different perspectives. So if we go back to the ajna, we can imagine that somebody with an undefined ajna has an ability to adopt many different beliefs. They don't have a fixed perspective of, oh, I only can believe this. This is what I believe. They can go, okay, well, maybe I can believe something else. Now, if we also remember that the open centers are being influenced by the defined centers of other people, well, then that would make sense. You're going to be potentially influenced by the energy of somebody with a defined center. So you can be influenced by somebody with a defined belief. So if you live in a family who have a specific, we go back to the religious belief, they have a specific religious belief, and you live in that family and you grew up and did all of the things that you do for this particular religious belief, and then you move away and suddenly you just don't feel like you want to continue to practice that belief. And that's because you've come out of the aura or the frequency of these defined beliefs, and you have gone into a space where you don't have that influence anymore, and now you're open to somebody else who has a particular belief. Now, we're always going to be influenced, and the younger we are, the more influenced we're going to be. But as we get older, it's almost like every influence that we've come in contact with, it's imprinting a little bit in that particular center. It's almost like there's a bit of a memory. And so we start to hold on to those particular memories of what we like and what we don't like, what aligns with the way we believe in things and what doesn't align with it. And so that's why as you get older, you might have more of a clear thought on certain beliefs. It doesn't mean you're not going to always be still open to different ideas and different concepts, but it does mean that there is a potential for you to have something that really makes sense to you, and you kind of stick with it. And then it looks like a fixed belief, but it doesn't have to be a fixed belief. It means that for some reason, this has imprinted on you in a way that, yes, all the boxes are checked and it feels good to me. So what you've learned is exactly what all the open centers are here for. It's all about finding the wisdom of the center, to know what is your energy and to know what isn't your energy. So in other words, when you have an open center, we're talking about, as I said, a fluid energy that is dependent on the people that are transmitting around you. So that means that you could be inspired by something, or you could have an energy by somebody else, but that's not necessarily what you feel in your heart or at all because it doesn't align with you. So you have the ability to say, oh no, this is not part of me. I don't want this. Now, if we look from a mechanical, physical perspective, and we imagine that we saw that manifestors, reflectors, and projectors make less of the population than the generators. There's more generators in the world than anybody else. When we talk about projectors, reflectors, and also manifestors, we're talking about people who have open sacral centers, which means that they don't have a constant supply of life force energy that comes from the sacral. I'll talk more about the sacral in a minute. So if all generators have a constant supply of energy that comes from the sacral, the most powerful motor in the whole human design system, and a generator is meant to burn this energy in the day to have a good sleep because they'll have a new bunch of energy the next day. It never stops. It's an infinite battery that never stops. So now we have somebody who's a manifestor or a projector. They're getting in the aura, or they're picking up the frequency of a generator type. This energy not only goes into their sacral area, it gets bigger, it gets huge. So what happens is you have somebody who has an incredible amount of energy. And what they don't realize, if they're not actually paying attention, now this is where the wisdom comes in, is that this energy is something that is transient. This is something that's coming and then it's going. And what happens is if they believe that that energy is always there, it's infinite, like an infinite supply, like it is from the people who are transmitting it, then there's potential for getting burnt out. There's potential for going beyond your limitations because you think that you always have this energy. Now, when you are using the energy in a way where you're getting the wisdom to know that this center is an open center and then that is how it operates for you, you're saying that, yes, I can feel this energy. I'm going to ride this wave of energy. I'm going to get done what I need to get done in the day, but I'm also going to know that I'm going to need some rest afterwards because I don't have a constant supply of energy because that's not the way I'm set up. So that is the wisdom. Now, the wisdom comes in many different ways with all the different centers, and each center has a specific theme, as I said. So that's how you get the wisdom. So the open centers are here for us to learn more about who we are, to understand our energy, to understand how our energy flows, to understand the fluidity of it, and that also to understand that it is transient energy, and once it goes, it goes. It's not there forever. But having said that, we can get imprints of energy, and usually that's sort of like belief systems or inspirations or, for instance, our identity. We could get imprints that kind of stick with us. Other than that, though, it's fluid. It doesn't mean we don't have an identity if we have an open identity. It doesn't mean that we don't have emotions if we have an open emotional center. It means that the energy is transient. And when it comes into our field, then it becomes our energy. But it is our energy for a certain period of time, and then it flows away, and then it's gone. And we will get more energy from another person who's transmitting. And then when it goes away and it's gone. And when we know that this energy is literally just going through us. Now, there are certain energies we just don't want to have. If somebody comes in and they have an open emotional center and it's like getting bombarded by emotional energy all around, understanding that this emotional energy is not something that you have to really do anything about. Like, you can release it if you want to. Learning how to release your emotional energy. And usually when they say any energetic influence that we get from other people can be released by laying down for about 15 minutes. That releases a lot of this energy so that we can get back to our normal, whatever that is, when we have these open centers. So that's kind of how the energy of the open centers works. Again, fluidity, wisdom, and understanding all the different flavors. And if you can understand the way your open centers work, they can be a source of a lot of happiness and joy within you, because you know when to ride the waves and you know when to not ride the waves or get rid of the energy instead of actually having to cope with the energy. So let's get into the centers, and we'll talk about all the different ways they can express themselves when they are undefined or defined.